Hello everyone, this is Uncle Sam from Kotu.org. This is part 2 of a tutorial series dealing with the Spline tool in Worldbuilder. Worldbuilder is the tool by Relic to create maps for Company of Heroes 2. And in the first part we've covered texture splines. Now that we know the basics about splines and how to place texture splines, we'll deal with object splines now in part 2. This part 2 will be separated into chapters. In the first chapter we are dealing with separated object splines. With separated objects I mean things like bushes or hedgerows. Then in the second part we'll talk about wall splines. Walls have to be dealt differently with than hedgerows. And in the end I'll briefly talk about combined splines, where we combine texture and object splines, and this might even be extended to the combination of any type of splines. So say texture and deform splines, object and deform splines, and every combination you could think of. So let's get things started and let's begin with separated object splines. I'll go to Worldbuilder, and right here you see one example of such a spline. Here we have a large line of bushes placed by a spline. You can basically, just like I've shown in the previous tutorial, modify the orientation and the spline itself just like any texture splines, except that now you have objects placed along the spline. So I want to delete this and get into how to place such object splines. For this you have to choose the object mode here on the top right with the spline tool selected. And I think it's hard to see in the video, but this part where you actually activate the object spline is grayed out right now. And this is because right now we have no object in our default object list. Before there is an object in the object list of a spline tool, I can right click on the map as much as I want. I can't place a spline. So the first thing to do is to place objects in this object list. So I'll just start like the spline that we've just investigated with some bushes. These I can find here in the objects list on the bottom. Bushes are listed under EPBS, Environment, Art, Nature, Bushes. And especially for splines there are bushes called bush row, different types, and also for different times of the year. So just for demonstration reasons I'll take this bush row 1 snow object, and I can add this one to the default object list by selecting it in the list and then hit add object to list. This adds this object over here, and now I can I have to go up there. Now this part is active. I can make a check mark, and by this I'm now able to place an object spline. So here you can see a spline of snow bushes. Now I can add more than just one type of object to this list. I may as well, again for demonstration reasons, add this snowfall to object list, and also this bush row for summer or spring, what is it? Summer, to the list. So I've got 3 types of objects here, and if I place this spline now, you'll see that I've got all these different types of objects, all these different types of bushes in my spline. Actually, for the next step I want to zoom out a bit and place a bit longer spline. Or actually, one more thing, I place this shorter spline, and then here I can just go add to back, and this will add more nodes to my spline. You may see this even better. Or alternatively, I could just delete these ones in between and change the length of the spline. So these are all different modification options. I have to modify the shape of my spline. But let's go back to this. And if you look closely now, you'll see that all these objects from the list appear in a clear order. It always starts with snow, fall, summer, snow, fall, summer, snow, fall, summer, and so on. Now, another thing that you might notice is when I now click on this spline, it highlights these objects, and the objects of this spline are now listed in the current spline objects list. So now I have got the possibility to edit my splines or my objects of this particular spline by, say for example, removing the fall object. Say I select the fall bush, hit delete, so it's removed from this list. I can now apply these changes, and what you see now is that there is no fall bush anymore. It's now snow, summer, snow, summer, snow, summer, and so on. So by selecting a spline, I have the possibility to modify the object list. I've got more options here. I can basically change the order if there was more than one. Say I add this fall spline again by selecting it, and in the current objects part I add to list, I apply changes, and now I see again snow, summer, fall. And when I select this, I may say I want to start in a different order and move this one up in the list. Now you see the order here has changed, and if I apply, the order in the spline here changes as well. Then say I don't want this to appear ordered anymore. Then I can change this by placement type, which now is set to order, and replace it by random. Again, I apply these changes, and now they are no longer ordered, but the objects in the list appear in random order. And I've got more things to do to change here. Say the probability of the objects to appear in this spline by default is set to each one is set to 100. So every object appears with the same probability, but say I want to have this snowfall bush to appear less often. I select this object in the list, hit the probability button here, and reduce its probability to appear, say to 30. Click OK, apply, and now you see that the fall bush only appears twice in this whole spline, while the snow and summer bush appear much more often. So this is another option I have. Or if I now zoom in a bit more, you'll see that the orientation of my bushes is along this line, along the spline. I may change this by giving it a rotation variation from 0 to 1. Say if I add a 1 here and apply changes, all different types of orientations appear in the spline. We've got objects aligned, and we've got objects under a 90-degree angle. All different orientations are present. I may reduce this to 0 again. Oops, didn't apply. So 0, apply change, and it's ordered again. And well, if I say go back to just the summer bush, delete this one, apply changes, I notice there's some separation between the individual bushes. If I want to reduce this separation, I can now use the spacing option down here. Excuse me, by mistake I hit the hotkey for stopping my recording, so I have to start again from here. We were talking about the separation of these individual objects in the spline, and with the spacing option down here I can now change the separation. Right now it has a separation of 0%, and I can change this by from 0 to 1, or even -1 to +1, and this means -100% gap to +100% gap. I want to adjust this now to -0.1 to -0.1. Apply the changes, And notice the gap is less. So with -2 might be even better. Yeah, this is now a closed line of bushes. As you see, there are two values to put here. I may even make this a random variation, say from -0.2 to plus 0.5. So by applying this, the separation is random, varying between -20% and +50%. Obviously, for a row of bushes, this makes not much sense, so I just go back to 0 and we'll go on from here. So we've covered the spacing between the individual bushes. We may even vary the position with respect to the spline, so the position sideways. This is done by the width variation. So we put in a variation of 5 and apply this change. This means the bushes are scattered by, I think, 5 meters around the line of the spline. You may combine all these things, of course. Say we want a rotation variation of 100%. We want the spacing to be varied from 0 to, or from -1 to +1. Apply all this, and basically all the objects appear randomly orientated and everything with respect to the spline. So with this, we've got, I think, pretty much all the the modification options covered, which are important for separate object spline. And the next point in our tutorial is the wall spline. If we go back to the overview here, the wall spline is something different, different to the separate object spline. If we go back to Worldbuilder and we change our object list, the default one now, by deleting all the bushes, and instead picking one of the walls. The walls are listed under Environment, Art Ambient, Objects, go all the way down, Walls, and then we may choose between different types of walls. I'll pick a stone wall, and I'll pick a rather big one, say concrete large 04. So I pick this one, I go up in the tool, I add it to the default list. This enables me to place a wall spline now on the map. So I right click and place the spline, and this now places the walls or the wall segments just like the separated objects in a bush spline. Now I want to go down here, delete this one, and illustrate the difference between the problems we have with walls if we choose just the separate object spline type. If I put this wall spline over a slope or this small hill here, you will notice what I mean. Say I'll put it this way and position it. Now if we look from the side, you will see those are really just individual objects. They align along the hill. Where they appear, they adjust relative to the terrain, but they are not connected. Even if you look on top, there is some space in between them, and this is not what we want. For a wall, there is a different option. So I select this spline, go to the current spline, and I make a check mark on wall mode. So by this, and apply the change, you will notice that the individual segments of the wall are now connected to each other, and from the side even the vertical offset is interpolated and connected without any separation. So this is what we want for walls. They should align along the terrain, be connected to each other, and show no gaps. So this is the difference between separated objects and wall mode. Now, especially for walls, I want to illustrate another thing that we can modify. Say I activate the spline, you will see the individual elements of the wall are still marked here by the gray outline, and each of the segments has a number associated to it. So this is segment 6, 7, 8, 9, and so on. Say I want a hole in the wall at segment 9. I can do this by picking the subselection or the subsection of this spline 9. Can use the arrow keys here or directly put it in, and then edit the state of this section 9. A new window pops up called Object State, and depending on the object I've chosen here, I've got different object states which I can edit. Say a car has a state called burned state, etc., and a wall specifically has a state which I can add now here and pick from the drop-down list, which is called Wall Destroy. I apply this, and this creates a destroyed wall segment inside my wall spline. I can extend this wall by doing the same for, say, segment 10. Add Wall Destroy, OK. Or I can even remove this state again from segment 9 by choosing segment 9, edit state, pick the Wall Destroy from the object state and remove it. This removes the destroyed segment at position 9 of the spline. So this is the difference between regular separated object splines and wall splines. You can have connected segments. Actually, you can also, of course, edit the state of individual bushes, so to say, but bushes in this case don't have anything special except for health. You may, well, have to choose an object which has more states. A hedgerow has a burned state, or yeah, you have to check with individual objects that are available. Now, one last thing, or let's just close this section. So wall splines have been explained too by now. You know what's the difference between separated object splines and wall splines. As a last point in this tutorial, I want to briefly talk about combined splines. Okay, so we go back to Worldbuilder and say, I don't want these bushes to just somewhat float on the territory. There's nothing around them. You can have a look here. It seems like an isolated object. You can fix this, of course, by putting splats or a separate spline with a texture below it, or you can just directly attach this texture to the same spline which you use for the bushes. So what I do is I go select the spline, go up here to the modes, and add a check mark at the texture mode of the same spline. So now I can go to the texture mode. I can go to, I don't know what to say, say NM Flora. I just pick some texture which fits. Here down here is the texture preview again. Let's just check if there's something that makes sense. Some leaves maybe. Yeah, leaves may make sense, or well, it doesn't really matter right now. I just picked this one. It doesn't really fit, but so I pick this leaf thin and I click add to current, and this now adds leaves as a texture spline below the objects. Now these leaves are not very not very prominent, so let me just pick something that is immediately noticeable, say these large roots. I pick these roots, hit assign to replace the leaves texture with the roots, and yeah, you see now I've got roots which are attached to the objects spline, and the big advantage is if I now modify this object spline, it simultaneously modifies the textures and the objects. So this saves me time. I don't have to align two separated splines with respect to each other. I can do this simultaneously. Alright, with this I'll come to the end of this part 2 of the tutorial, which is dealing with object splines. I hope you understood how to use this special mode of a spline, and in the next part 3 we will talk about deform splines. Should there be any questions or you didn't understand a specific step inside this tutorial, please refer to the tutorial thread on code2.org, which is linked in the description of this video, and ask your question there. I will try to answer it as soon as possible. By this, I want to close this tutorial and thank you for your attention.